Okay.
Are we ready to go? Okay. All right, folks, it is 6 o'clock, and so I call to order the 6 o'clock work session in City Council to talk about and hopefully come close to finalizing a budget. Can you take a roll, Ms. Thomas?
Councilor Payne, Councilor Kingston,
Here.
Councilor Purdy,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wade,
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here. So I assume we'll get Councilor Payne shortly. I've not heard anything to the contrary, but knowing this is a topic of some concern, we want to get started promptly. Turn it over to the city manager. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight is another work session. This is what we call the penultimate session for you as leaders of this community to reflect on what you want in this budget. We proposed on March 6th a budget based on the consideration of the city manager and staff. There have been a lot of conversations since then. You've given us some indication of things that are important to you. We've made you aware of the resources that are available. We of course have argued that through particularly the VCF process, that's an important process, and we urge you to maintain that. You have a number of citizens involved in the review process, and they've scored proposals that were submitted and made recommendations in terms of funds available. But at the end of the day, you are the leaders of this community, and you hear other voices that express other needs, and it is your decision to grapple, as Deputy City Manager Marshall says, to rumble with that. So we look forward to a vigorous discussion tonight.
So I just, one question. You've given to us this spreadsheet that shows potential funding available. Does that assume, oh, I said below that is the number that assumes the allocations that have been, and the amendments that have been added in. Is that right?
These are the things that are on this sheet. I'm sorry, I'm trying to adjust this so it'd be better for the screen. The amendments that are on the sheet are just ones that we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's been decided. That's what, you all have the discretion to do tonight.
Okay.
Ms. Hamill, can you help me with something?
Sure.
So FY '24 amendments, the $2,194,091, that's more money, quote, available than what you originally thought when you put your budget together.
Correct.
Okay.
That's a
And then-
revised revenue projection.
And then the CIP contingency is just that, it's what's in the, it's with the contingency line item in the CIP.
So one clarification on that, there is currently about $20 million in the CIP contingency. Based on the summary that's online and also that we handed out to you all last week, part of the proposed CIP uses a little over 10 million of that. And there were some other suggestions which got it down to this 8.4.
That's what we have basically to
Correct.
quote.
If you accept the proposed CIP as shown.
Yeah, okay. And then projected revenue budget surplus. That's, help me understand that number. Is that the sum of 2.1? No, it can't.
No.
That's
No, no.
a whole separate bucket. So
Okay.
that is, we've gone in as part of the revenue team. We've
Uh-huh.
looked at our current day collections and we have projected out what we think. It also reflects the new real estate assessment that we just got in January, so that would be a half a year. A half a year of that collection, so we
Uh-huh.
know that revenues are gonna exceed the budget by at least this 10.4.
All right.
And we will have some other savings on the end. You're not really making firm decisions on this, cause
No, I
this
understand.
doesn't exist until the books are closed
Right,
in
right.
December. But this is just to give you some idea and other options if you wanna delay things
No,
that
that's
you,
very helpful.
before you
Yeah.
tonight.
Thanks for explaining that. Okay, great.
Other counselors have questions about our sort of starting point here?
So just to kind of explain, throughout, since last week, you all have been emailing suggestions to staff. We have put that on this chart. This will also be online after this meeting, for suggestions that we have received from all of you. I've started by just filling them in on this sheet. As you go through with yes, no, and assign amounts, we'll just fill in the sheet as we go.
Thank you for for putting all this together and helping crystallize where we are.
Sure. Thanks.
So, looking at the CIP contingency column, I note that the Buford School Project auditorium, 6.7 million, that is not already sort of baked in. In other words, if we funded that at 6.7 million, that would essentially wipe out the remainder of the CIP contingency.
If you pay for it with cash out of the contingency, we have the option to put that in and increase the bond sale by that amount as well. It wasn't clear from last week where you might be. I know we're also, the grant application has been filed, and we won't find out about that until June. And so we didn't fill in anything in the columns because we weren't quite sure where council landed.
So is it still possible to take it out of surplus?
It would be a plan, but
Okay.
because that doesn't exist yet, that wouldn't be decided officially until November, December.
Okay, does that, can we pull that off, Mr. Sanders, from a project management perspective if we had to? Doing the Buford Auditorium as a late change order, like get the pricing in now, but not cut the change order until,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, because,
I think we could.
yeah, I think that when we talked about it last time, the gentleman said that that was gonna be one of the last things that they
It'll be
did.
the last thing that they would get to anyway. So I think that's what makes it play into the schedule. So I think we should.
I don't know,
So you'd be able to do it as a placeholder, and then when it actually happens, the funds could be flipped in order to take care of the expense, that's what you're saying?
Because we have the specific amount now, and we would contract it based on that.
Okay.
It seems, from what I remember in the discussion last time, just so I'm understanding it, if the grant wasn't successful, then the plan would be to issue bonds for it, and then just for the bond payments, move contingency there, so you're not taking like 6 million immediately out of the contingency, you're just putting in more bond.
Well, I'm suggesting that it come out of the surplus, not the CIP.
Okay, either way, I'm just
So to
clarifying it would be bonds rather than cash payment.
So just to clarify, there are two options. One is, or there are three options. One is we get the grant, that'd be great, and then we'd use the grant money for that. If if we don't get the grant, then the two remaining options are, one, to pay cash for it, which would come out of year-end surplus or the contingency. Or you could add it to you could add it to bonds and use the year-end surplus to funnel more money to debt service to help buy down some of the debt service
Yeah.
payments.
And for me, I think it would make sense to issue bonds and then transfer money to debt payments. I think that may make it easier for us to kind of swallow the project fiscally.
Well, I know we did that last year, basically putting 2 years' worth of interest into, or taking 2 years' worth of interest out of the end-of-year surplus, as I recall.
We did.
And I know, I remember that we were, when we were talking to the bond rating agencies, we were emphasizing that as though at least we assumed that it was going to be impressive to them that we had that degree of foresight. Do we actually know whether that made a difference?
We got our triple
Well,
A bond
obviously,
rating. I
yeah.
mean, it was not a negative.
No. I'm just wondering if there is one of these options that is likely to be perceived more favorably by the rating folks.
I think you get positive points either way. I don't think anyone is necessarily a detriment. The rating agencies are aware that this project is coming, it's on our plate. When we talked to them last year, we were a little bit, we were not at the level we are now, but they certainly know it's a material project. I would say if there were one or the other, certainly one of the measures for a bond rating is your level of debt. Again, we're not really in that danger, but you always get kudos for paying down with cash if there's an opportunity. So I wouldn't say that would be a factor in your decision, really.
Yeah, my own view about the auditorium, as I said last week, and as I said from the screen last week, and I won't belabor it except to say that, depending on how you slice it, this project is 50% over budget. If you do if you include the escalation and these extra change orders, and that's fine. That happens all the time. Projects go over, particularly with escalation. But I made it a year ago sort of a point that we needed to get this project going. It needed to happen, but we needed to also realize that this auditorium might not happen due to fiscal constraints. And so for me, my strong preference would be for, if you've got to switch money around every how you do it to get the bonds, but that it comes out of that surplus line item, not that it's just added on to everything else we have going on. So I've said my piece.
So other questions I had, I don't remember talking about, in the CIP considerations, I don't remember talking about $575,000 for the City Hall lobby. Is that?
So some of these are things that have come up, the Stridling sidewalk, the bypass fire station, and so we are prepared to talk about those, or Mr. Sanders is.
All
So those items are there because in the last meeting, Councilor Payne asked the question about, is there something that we could anticipate coming up within the next year that could pose a concern if we don't try to factor that in based on making these decisions? So I went back and asked that question.
In terms
So-
of escalation.
Yes. So out of that, we looked at FY24, and we came back with 2 projects that we do anticipate there being significant increase. And that's the 2 projects that you have there, the City Hall lobby, which the original budget is funded out of ARP. There was no extra to cover escalation, so that now leaves that project short of what's needed. And the bypass fire station, which went through a internal design phase that changed the scope to some degree. And by the time it made it to an actual design phase with the external party is where the increase came from changes that were made on top escalation. So the project is now at $8 million to do the bypass fire station.
What was it originally?
I think we were at 4 at one time.
Cool.
So what's new?
Well, they flipped where the bay was gonna be and made one bay bigger than it was originally, so it made some significant cost increases. The slope makes it complicated, so that with doing that, that made an additional change. And then escalation over 3 different cycles is what has really contributed to the most of it. In talking with Mr. Goddard, who you heard from last week, it was he told me, I'm not coming back and asking for another penny. This is absolutely it. And I told him to be sure about that because of what you are wrestling with at this moment of making this decision. So he feels confident that that is the number, but it's a nice jump.
And could you refresh me on what the City Hall lobby project is going to be?
So I didn't refresh myself on it, unfortunately. I meant to do that, but I know that there were changes that are being proposed that's going to reorient how the public accesses that space, because it's just a big, open, loud well. So it's about sound improvements so that people who are actually working in that space can actually thrive in working in that space. But it's also to add a more of a welcoming aspect to the City Hall entry. We've added an ambassador as a position that we prioritize. There was no one to greet you when you came into the building.
Right.
And we've implemented that process. There will be the formalizing of that as well.
What is the cost escalation above the ARPA?
That 575 is the increase over. I don't remember
Okay.
what the total budget was. Did I give you that number? I don't think I
recall.
did. I just told you 575 is what we needed. I'll see if I can find that for you. I can let you know that as well.
And then do you want to talk about Sherwood?
Oh, I'm sorry. And then Stribling, Stribling is a beautiful project. I have to remind myself of that. So the engineering team has been working internally, trying to make sure that we keep moving on what is a very complicated sidewalk project. This request is that they are ready to begin their work with external parties. So we need to move into the design phase, and the design phase is why we need the $500,000 that we're asking for this fiscal year. And as soon as we finish that, we'll begin right-of-way acquisition. We will not be able to start right-of-way acquisition before if we don't get this allocation for '24, we won't be able to start right-of-way acquisition until July of '24. Which is going to be a halt to progress on the project. And we know that you all were concerned as well as trying to keep this on track for the sidewalk to be delivered in alignment with the development project that's going in that same area.
So you're showing it as two different pieces, one, I guess, to be spent in the next 3 months, and one.
And not necessarily spend in the next 3 months, is to use to be encumbered within the next 3 months so that we can start the design phase. The issue is that when we made the final decision with all the back and forth that we went through and trying to figure out how to consider the proposal that was being offered by the developer, you made the decision to put all the money in FY '25 in total. And then at that moment, we didn't know when we were going to be ready to start. Now we're basically coming back to you to tell you that we're ready to start.
And so as a practical matter, if you were to approve this, we'll be bringing a agenda memo item for the '23 amount to you, and then we'll amend the '24 budget for the $750. But it would count and come out of the contingency, which is why it's on this list.
Okay.
And again, that was really done. That's not ideal how we would do it. We would try to normally advance that, but it was just to be sure that we had rechecked everything, made sure we were fully aware of what escalation we know that we're going to face in the next few months specifically as you make these decisions.
One question I had that I did not, I should have mentioned in my email to you all. We've had a lot of requests for $75,000 to remove invasive vegetation. And they were suggesting that we take it out of the capital fund, and it doesn't seem to me to be a capital kind of a project. I'm wondering, number one, I mean, I don't know whether other counselors have any interest in funding that request, but it would seem to me that if we were to do it, it really shouldn't be coming out of a capital fund, because it's just not a capital expenditure.
It's offered as a capital expenditure because it's more of a program activity. It doesn't stop. So it only stops when there's no money. The way I appreciate it for how we're doing tree planting and the ash tree removal, this would just simply be in addition to that, and it's a specific line item that's available for them as a staff to prioritize where to remove and get as much done over the course of the year as they can,
So
and that it be replenished.
Who would actually be removing things?
So Parks and Rec would be prioritizing the work, but they would do it with a third party.
Okay.
And I'll say I'd be interested in having that be part of our discussions tonight. I've heard from tree commission arborists that it's pretty important, and they, vegetative landscape better than I do in terms of what's necessary.
Yeah, we'll see how things shake out, but I'm not opposed to doing that if we can make things,
Yeah.
make this work.
Saying is not, you know, I definitely would like to see it done as possible. It's not my first priority if we, based on the funds, but, yeah.
So that would, be a cash-related item, and are you interested in doing that as one time or as a program across all 5 years?
I think if we're gonna do it, it makes sense as a program, because it'll only be successful in that context, it seems like.
Yeah, 'cause they,
Kudzu doesn't stop.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's not a one-time.
I mean, this is a long-term investment, it sounds like something we just have to keep doing.
Yeah, I mean, you pick an area, you knock it down, you try to get back to it and treat it so that it doesn't come back as fast while you pick another area and try to knock that one down. That's why it's a CIP activity, because it really doesn't have an end.
And there's a line here for Muni Code. How much is that expected to be? And I think I remember what it's all about, but
That is, roughly about $10,000 a year. That would be a recurring expense. And that is basically a service. As I understand it, it's a service through Municode that will actually track the changes that are made throughout the code. So when people go and look at it, they're able to track changes essentially.
so it'll update.
Correct.
So that if I go online right now, I may not know, I may have a hard time finding the last 6 months of legislative changes, so to speak.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
More frequent than it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that came through as an email request from someone, and I forwarded it on to our council's office. And whether there's value in it, it seems valuable to me. I'm not gonna follow my sword about it, but,
I would say, as one who likes to look at such things, it's really valuable.
okay.
It is.
And John Blair had been pushing for it when he was city attorney, and of course, he was acting city manager for about 3 months, but he felt it was something that was very important as well.
That's 10,000?
$10,000 a year. Is it appropriate for us to sort of go through, I mean, frankly, one of the things I'm thinking is I'm looking at the proposed amendments. Many of them are programs that didn't get as much as they might have wanted out of VCF. Is it appropriate to just sort of talk about why perhaps those didn't get well-funded?
Do you think, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Would it be simpler with the CIP ones? I mean, if we started with CIP, I mean, are those ones you think we could just agree or disagree and cross off the list and then get to the VCF, which I think might be more discursive?
That's fine.
That's a suggestion.
I'll tell you, some of the projects I put on CIP considerations are things that we ought to be conscious of, not necessarily to be funded in this year, but when we were talking, other suggestions were made, for example, to have something to acknowledge that we're going to have to be putting money into West Haven redevelopment at some point. We also need to be looking at the library and, you know,
So, can we,
so on.
I think we want to go to CIP.
But nothing to spend this year. Yeah.
So we go into CIP consideration, so that's what we need.
If that's the preference, let's go there.
Yeah,
Okay?
go down a little bit.
So these are these are all the CIP considerations we have on the list.
So the
the
item
first-
just above it was Buford.
Yeah,
We
the
already
first
talked
one.
about
Oh,
that one.
my apologies.
Oh, that's threw me off.
Brian's view is that that should go into the surplus. So, I don't know how others feel about that.
So, I mean, with things like that, I would turn to y'all like, what is best physically, you know, options, you know, to go to the CIP or bonding.
Well, they're gonna pull it from, you're still going to pull the money from someplace to get it into the CIP, right?
So my suggestion would be that you could put it in the surplus column That would give us some time to figure, or we could just allocate it as a reservation in the contingency. You don't have to make a formal decision right now. That, we could wait until we find out about the grant. We'll have to come back to you with another item anyway. That would, so you could do either or. If you, one thing to keep in mind is that the contingency will also be replenished with the year-end surplus per our policy.
Right.
So you don't have to immediately decide to spend it tonight.
So, but if we allocate that tonight, will that essentially remove $6.7 million from what we have up here at?
From whichever column you want to put it
Right.
in.
Yeah, that would mean you would take 60% of the projected, I'm gonna use my words carefully, the projected surplus, and you would have, about 4 million or less
that would-
left.
That would be if you cash fund it, correct? Wouldn't it be
Right.
differently if we bonded it and you just put money from the surplus to debt service payments?
You could.
You could
But
do
my
it.
strong preference would to do that.
Yeah.
But for purposes of our conversation tonight, that can be resolved later, right? I mean, you're needing to know where these buckets, unless we just wanna put the 10.4 added to the CIP now to make it clear.
It's not, that's a decision that you make in the fall,
Yeah,
in
understood.
November. Okay?
I mean,
All
the
I'm
only-
willing to do is just be really clear, are we funding these things out of the surplus, or are we adding them to the CIP program officially now?
So the one thing that I would say is that if you want to amend the CIP so that you have the full 90 whatever million for the project in, then tonight you have to either put it in column, the amendment column or the contingency column. If you are okay with putting the school project in at a budget of whatever that number is, less the auditorium, and just kind of hanging on to that until we find the answer for the grant and the other things, it doesn't really matter whether you put it in, you can put it in column D and then later decide if you're gonna fund the full thing out of the surplus or fund the debt service.
As a practical matter, come January 1, those two numbers get added together anyway.
As a practical matter, column D will be whatever it is, column C will be there, and it'll be something more than that probably, because,
But since anything that is a surplus is supposed to, in the absence of any other plan, is supposed to get added to the CIP contingency
That's right.
fund.
that's right.
it-
If you put it in the contingency column tonight and put the full project budget in the CIP, then actually, we won't be able to fund the other things because we don't have 6.7 left. We only have 6.2. And we would be done with the contingency column for purposes of tonight.
That's one of my concerns. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, and again, as I said,
In other words, if we allocate it to this column tonight, then we're gonna lose any flexibility to add other things to the CIP.
yes, I understand, which again was kind of what I was trying to get to with my point of plan to bond it and then pay for debt service from the surplus, if the grant is not successful.
Can we do that?
If you want to put it in as bonds, yes, it doesn't really go, it just goes in a CIP amended column. For the CIP, it doesn't really fit in either one of these. We'll just amend the CIP to add the 6.7 million as an expense, and we'll add bonds of 6.7 million.
So we're going to the market in June, and we already have two big projects that we're looking to bond. That would take us to 10 million. This would take us over 15. Would that be beyond the rate that we would normally bond?
So we actually wouldn't probably sell these bonds. We're gonna sell probably, unless there's a blip in the market, because the interest rates have gone up. If we were to sell today, we're probably gonna be somewhere in the 3 to 3.25% interest, whereas, the last few years, we've been sub 1.5%. So unless there's a blip in the market, we won't sell all these bonds at once. We'll be selling on a spend rate basis, so we wouldn't sell in June, anyway.
And my thinking is generally if things are bondable, it will just give us more flexibility, because I see our problem as being the timing of when a lot of expenses are coming due rather than our overall fiscal health. So in my mind, bondability just helps ease our affordability of anything.
As long as you're committed to also funding the debt service.
And I am, and I think we have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the year, we will have more flexibility, more money.
Mhm.
So that's,
But the bottom line of this conversation is, I'm sensing from this council that your intent is to assure that the auditorium at Beaufort has funding.
Correct.
Mhm.
Yes, it
Correct.
is, but,
Yes.
yes, absolutely. But again, it doesn't need to be, from my view, added on top of what we already have here. We've got surplus that's out there. Some of that surplus needs to pay for debt service, or needs to just be moved over, maybe move it over now to see how we can't do that. But the plan, to me, the plan should be that one way or the other, we're funding that auditorium out of other funds beyond what's already in our CIP. Because last year we had a long discussion about what the CIP should look like. These are a bunch of new things that we're facing that we need to address. And I see that auditorium as optional, not essential, but anyway.
I think Michael's way allows us more flexibility. And I think that I'm hearing the council wants to fund the auditorium, but we need to do it in a way that allows monetary flexibility and understanding that when the renovations begin, based on how the renovations are going to occur, the auditorium would be the final phase, but it is all one project because there are 3 different buildings.
Yeah, and I think that y'all will be able to figure out when to bond it and all of those pieces. My only point is, the 6.7 doesn't need to be on top of everything else that's here, it needs to be within that. So ever how you get that sorted out in terms of bringing over money from, into the CIP, I think is up to y'all.
So, would you be in agreement if we came back to you with a CIP budget that includes the auditorium on the expenditure side, increases the revenue, bonds, CIP you would adopt, and then we'll put a tag in this budget surplus column for additional money to go to the debt service fund to help buy down that additional $6 million worth of debt, which, I can let you, we can talk about that when the time gets here. It's roughly.
Well, again, it's not just the debt service that I think needs to be paid. It's the amount for the auditorium. So not just the debt service, but.
So I think for purposes of tonight, the decision is, 1, we either amend the CIP for the full project cost, showing it as bonds. We amend the CIP with the full cost, show it as 6.7 out of contingency, or we leave the CIP as it is and we come back to you at a later date with the auditorium piece, and you can decide whether it's grant, bonds, or cash.
That would be my preference.
yeah. Will that hem us up for our decision-making tonight?
Okay. Sounds like the most flexible option.
Yes.
So come back to you with the auditorium once we know about the grant, or?
Yes.
Sounds like it.
And you said you'll know about the grant when?
Is it June?
I heard you.
June-ish?
And so functionally, if it came back, and let's say the theoretical example is, grant wasn't successful, it sounds like a majority of council is in support of adding the auditorium, and so we would make an amendment to the FY '24 CIP budget to then add it in. Okay, just trying to
And
think
if-
through what it would look like.
And the grant could come through, but not at the full amount, and we would still need an amendment.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
We'll work with whatever we get.
okay. All right, we can go with that.
All right.
We're doing the auditorium with the flexibility.
Okay.
All right.
Then, coming down the CIP consideration list, Michael, I know you'd been suggesting a line for West Haven. Did you have something in particular for this fiscal year, or did you just want to get it into the hopper so that we're not forgetting about it?
Well, I've been unsure what the best way for us to do this is, because in the past, we've used placeholders, and I understand we don't want, without a specific ask, I guess we're trying to get away from that. But CRHA is early estimating $15 to $20 million of city consideration, and I just want us to do everything we can to ensure that we're planning for that, because I think this is a promise we have to keep, and my fear is a couple years from now, when that expense is actually needed, if we didn't think ahead in terms of what's needed to afford it, we'll say, oops, you know, there's not room in the budget, and I really don't want to see that happen. So that's kind of my thinking, and we know it's a very early estimate, but they're thinking like 15 to 20 million of city contribution, which would obviously just be a small part of all the other money that they're going to be bringing in.
20 total from us.
Correct.
Yeah.
You correctly pointed out, we don't have an ask. We don't have, there may be an estimate, there must be something behind it, but we have not received it. And I know we want to commit to it, to West Haven, but that's tying up whatever amount, you know.
Right.
It's tying up money on a project that we don't know what when it's gonna be required, and there's probably time to plan for that. We'd like to receive a plan for that project sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so I think that whether we have a placeholder in there or not, I think that what I've seen, what we have done for the school reconfiguration, where we, you know, essentially last year, this time we were talking about where we're gonna put 33 or 60 million, now we're up to 92. We will look at what our finances are at the time. I know that we'll be committed to it, no matter when it is, but,
Does it bugger up your accounting or whatever if we put placeholders in? I know we got into issues with West Main Street and things like that, having these markers out there that didn't, I guess, mean anything. But I personally feel like if we had, 5 years ago, really had better estimates for the school reconfiguration, we're really thinking, and we don't have anything on here about Walker, which I guess could be years away. But I'm not sure from a CIP perspective what's the best way to manage that. From a project management, program management sort of perspective, you'd be thinking, 5-10 years out, where you think you're going to make your investments. I can appreciate the point that if we've not gotten a request, maybe we don't consider it live, but.
So I think that if we don't think, so we budget out 5 years. If we don't think the ask is gonna hit in the next 5 years, I would not suggest that you necessarily put it there. What we can do, though, is for these projects, 15, 20 million for this one, whatever we think Walker might be, we can start putting those in the debt projection. Keep in mind, with the current CIP that we have right now, in the proposed budget, your annual debt service is doubling from 13 million to 20-some million. So that's really where you need to concentrate on as we add, while we have capacity, as we're adding, that's the piece of the pie that's getting bigger and bigger out of the general fund for other stuff.
Which is why I think, adding them to projections could be helpful, because of others have said, my thinking is kind of, we obviously easily end up in council and decision-making environment where the decision is 1 year ahead, and we're not necessarily weighing the 5-year on consequence and how we prepare to afford what's coming in 3, 4, 5 years. And I think uncertainty, but I would guess a request for West Haven will come within the next 5 years. And I want to avoid a situation, as others mentioned, last budget cycle, with the school reconfiguration process, I think we ended up in a more difficult environment than we needed to because for a variety of reasons, like the fact there was no city manager's office for a while. The council hadn't had enough time to kind of think through and project what it would be, and we just ended up in like a rushed decision-making environment that I feel like we could have been avoided and been easier for everybody, and I don't want to repeat that mistake for West Haven and other major expenses that we know we're committed to, but we're not thinking through like the cost projections yet, if that makes sense.
Where would you put the projections? How would that look on this chart, Ms. Hamel?
So it wouldn't show up on this chart, but it's certainly, you know, I think it's, especially these big projects, it is worthy of sort of tracking that, and we talk about those when we talk through the debt projections.
Okay.
You know, that would be something that we would tee up, because, you know, those projections will change every year. There are a lot of factors that go there, so because everything looks peachy this year doesn't mean it will look peachy next year. But you know, to your point, I think, you know, it's a great point, and we should start accumulating that list.
Yeah, but I think what Councilman Payne is saying is that we want to add it to the FY '24 CIP. In other words, the 5-year look ahead, right? Not to be spent in FY '24, but that CIP budget that you keep as part of that big book I got. So that wouldn't necessarily apply to these columns tonight, but going ahead and plugging those into the larger CIP,
Okay.
is what I'm hearing.
That, I mean, that's kind of my thinking, and to that end, I think, I'm sure there's a couple others that could be in this bucket, but another obvious one is the Walker phase of school reconfiguration. We haven't thought about the cost, how we'll plan to afford it, and that's something we should start as soon as we can, so we're ready.
So that's good. I just want to be a little bit cautious there that we certainly can put it in there, but that's not just numbers on a piece of paper. The rating agencies will absolutely look at that, and, you know, if we're talking about, you know, a $90 million CIP this year and then a $90 million at the 5-year, we're going to need to be able to back that up with some sort of revenue enhancements or however you're going to pay for that debt service. And
Right.
so it has to be a sort of more than we know it's coming. It has to be fully fleshed out in how you would afford it. So,
So it feels
well,
like
let
a
me say,
chicken
that's
and-
not fair, not fully fleshed out, but you certainly have to be prepared to talk about how you would pay for that increased debt service.
Okay. So we could put it into the projections and develop the strategy for paying for it when those expenditures hit, understanding that they are going to hit within the next 3 to 5 years. Is that what I hear you saying, or no?
I would say that I would think it would, I'm not a rating agency, and I wish Kevin were here to talk to you tonight. I don't know how you feel about this, Mr. Rogers. I would think that it certainly would be notable if we're gonna go from $130 million debt service, which is currently proposed, to
Okay.
something that's closer to 200,
Yep.
you know, 180,
So
200,000.
I think what you're
200
saying,
million,
this
excuse
is
me.
this is a very important conversation for our community, because what we're hashing out right now is the fact that once we put something on this list, it's not just a wish list. This is going in front of people that weigh on our financial future.
That's right.
And I think my point, maybe Michael's as well, is the sooner we have those kinds of come to Jesus moments, whatever you want to call them, the better. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking about Walker, we're going to be talking about this or whatever, and then,
And yeah, I mean, because my point is, sooner than later, I think we need to move West Haven off the wish list into, we're committed to this, we're gonna do it, to kind of step back as maybe one approach to it for that project and others, include them in a projection of what the impact would be on debt service payments in the future, and maybe over the next year in preparation for next budget cycle, we kind of discuss and plan for what is it gonna take to get it in at that point, especially if we get finalized cost estimates. and all
That works better when there is a plan and we know what we're saving towards.
Because, I'm sorry, sir.
If we're allocating, I mean, if the project is $30 million that we're gonna need at some point in time, we're creating a savings account, and that we are contributing to build up to that. And we know how we're gonna finance it. We know that it's affordable in terms of the additional cost in terms of debt service. So I understand the need, but you know, as Chris has pointed out, we just can't put it in there without some plan for financing it long-term. And right now, all we're doing, if you put something in, we don't have a context of how much we're gonna need.
So, are we the delay for the West Haven project, or is it like, are their board, you all like,
At this point, the city is not the delay. They're beginning resident design and early cost estimates. The concern is just making sure, because it's gonna be big, when they're ready for their ask for the city, we don't cause a delay at that point, if that makes sense.
And I would also say, like, these are great things to talk about as part of your strategic planning. And I think it also, part of that exercise will also demand some sort of discipline to stick with that plan, which means that, you know, as you look at this long-term and you look at these, you know, these big goalposts that you're trying to reach at these sort of long periods of time, that means that the short-term things that come before you, you know, be it inflationary increases, be it new projects, be it whatever, have to be weighed heavily against those long-term plans to make sure that, you know, your priorities are still what they are.
Right. So I guess, is there a way to have sort of an informal CIP, whatever you want to call it?
Sure.
I
That used to be called Year 5.
whatever, yeah. In other words, basically a model that you help us put together that's not the formal CIP, but still captures the things that we're talking about.
Well, I mean, we could do years 6 through 10, right? And we just don't, you know, we cut the print of the spreadsheet off because we're really looking at a 5-year plan.
right.
But we're sort of mapping out if you want to do 10 years or whatever, and we start incorporating that into our debt service projections and things. And I think, you know, as part of your strategic plan, then when other CIP items come before you mid-year, during the year, we need to bring that plan back out and see how it all fits in there.
So it sounds like maybe the best approach at this point would be to do that and to have that help guide our strategic plan discussion and decisions.
Yep.
And over the next year, have it kind of tee up next budget cycle.
Absolutely, we
Yeah.
could work on that this summer, that'd be great.
Most of the things that I had on this list fall into that
yeah,
description.
that,
And I think
6
that,
to 10 year.
yeah,
whatever.
and that would be, I think that would be beneficial on two sides. It solidifies in our minds that these things are important, but it gives us an opportunity to see how those things are going to happen, because in year 5, you could have the request from, well, maybe in year 4.5, you could have the request from West Haven, but because you've been planning for it all along, it's not a gotcha. And you know that in year 6, we've got a plan for what your request may be.
Yeah,
And so,
And it also shows commitment,
agreed.
because
Yeah.
I think we must show commitment to West Haven. We must.
Well, I don't want to let this moment pass by without noting that $15 million for West Haven would be by far the most money we've put per unit into any public housing project, any affordable housing project. And it may be the only opportunity that we have where there might be some opportunity for a public-private partnership of some sort. And I would hope that we would look at it and say, okay, we're looking at that $15 million, we're looking at whatever it's gonna take for Walker, and we get some rough estimate there of $50 million or whatever, pick a number, and we start looking at it all, and we say, if we're going to do for the schools what we know we need to do for the schools, we've got to really encourage CRHA to work on some method of financing this project that doesn't involve $100,000 per unit.
And it should be noted, even in the early plans and all the work they've already done, the total project cost for West Haven would be well over 100 million.
Right.
So just 15-20 is coming from the city. There's low-income housing tax credit financing, and then they also, even for the existing projects in Crescent Hall, South First Street, got significant private sector donations
Yeah.
from several organizations, and have been working with Riverbend, who provided a lot of subsidy and
Mhm.
support from the private sector. So
Yeah, and
I think they've been in that direction and been doing that.
well, I certainly hope so, but it hasn't, the notion of the public-private partnership, yes, we've gotten private money into some of the more recent projects, but sort of an ongoing kind of, yes, it's some housing, yes, it's some commercial, you know, there are mixed-use kinds of things where some profit people would be involved perhaps. I think one of the things we've got to do is look for occasions when we can encourage private actors to, you know, to put more money into these things, because I'm just trying to figure out how we possibly do all of the things that we think we want to do. Let's not miss any opportunity, and I would want to make sure that CRHA has in their planning, I guess my concern is if we tell CRHA in advance, don't worry, 15 million bucks in present dollars, which would probably be 25 million by the time we would get there, not a problem. Well, it is going to be a problem, and it's going to be a problem for the entire city. And I would hate to have anybody get sort of complacent about it, to say, well, the city's
So-
good for it.
Yeah, so I really don't think that we need to get bogged down in that project right now. I think that what I would like to see is that, Michael, if you can work with the Housing Authority, and when we have our retreat next month, to try to get an idea of when they think this project will get going, we can be able to fill in some of that. Now, I don't think that we want to get into any more deeper into that project right
think
now.
we just
I think
wanna
we
put it
have
on
made
the
the
radar.
commitment that we want to put it in that 6 to 10 year thing.
And
So,
that's putting it on our radar, and it also gives us an opportunity to have the discussions that we need to have from the city side with CRHA and vice versa.
Right.
It's not saying we're gonna just give you $50 million and then you have it. It means that we are committed to you making the renovations, and we will be there to assist or help, whatever word you wanna use, but there are certain things that you have to do on that side as well.
And that sounds good in terms of preparing it for the strategic planning, and
Yes.
as Vice Mayor said, we don't need to get into it, but I'll just note CRHA is doing that work. They're thinking that way. They're thinking the city funds unlock well over $100 million of other money. And, I mean, they're, for this
Okay.
and future projects, they're being as proactive as they can. And 15 million, I mean, you're talking about the cost of some bridge and road projects. We can do it, and it's worth it.
yeah.
So we're gonna put it on our radar, Ms. Hamble.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any of these other projects that you want, are these other projects, do they fall in this sort of 6 to 10 year category, or are there some that you want to talk about for this 5 years?
Well, I'll say about the one I have here, council chambers update. You can take that off the list. I just want it out there somewhere in your facilities planning, Mr. Sanders. I guess whatever list of projects you're keeping for the lobby, if you could also consider some sort of update for council chambers. Maybe that's
Yeah, you got the 70s feel for sure.
self-indulgent, I don't know, but I think the room is terrible, and something as simple as this would honestly be a step up.
Yeah.
And I feel the same about, when people are calling in or looking, our folks do a lot of amazing things with equipment that seems to me to be from the 90s or early 2000s. When I look at the screens and so forth, not looking flashy, just want something that looks professional, and the same for that space.
We join you in that aspiration, so we will,
Okay.
we'll work on
Look at
that.
updates and potential costs.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so we're sort of deleting that from present consideration.
Sounds like the bypass fire station we need to do.
I mean, we're,
So the figures that you said, Mr. Sanders, next to the City Hall lobby and the bypass fire station, are the monies we would need to put in it
Yeah.
over and above what's already there? Is
Correct.
that what you're saying?
Yeah, that brings both projects in line.
Okay, so 2,575,000.
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
all right.
And both of those would be bondable if that's what you want to do.
Hmm.
and the rest of the projects, I mean, I don't know that we're in a position to put anything in particular on any of those right now. I just, while we were listing things that I wanted to keep foremost in our minds, there they
So,
are.
Mr. Mayor, is Crossings 2 the same as homeless shelter?
I would think so. I didn't put in the homeless shelter, but
Well,
Go ahead, Michael.
my idea between,
development.
by putting that in was simply, I think we recognize that there is a need for another facility, whether it's called Crossings 2 or whatever.
and I think there is still an important distinction. Crossings 2 would be permanent supportive housing. Homeless shelter, the idea would be you have a year-long permanent shelter that's kind of, people who are homeless can go there, and it's kind of the first step until they move into permanent supportive housing.
Oh, I
So there
see.
is,
Or not even permanent supportive housing, because not everyone who falls into homelessness would be eligible for permanent supportive housing. You may hear it called PSH. There's an eligibility criteria, and it comes with supportive services. Some individuals fall into homelessness and they merely need some time to be able to rebuild, and they are very successful on their own without continued services. So you would still need, with a shelter, housing access, I'm gonna call it traditional housing access for the individuals who are in your temporary shelter, as well as additional permanent supportive housing units for those where it would be applicable and would help support them.
So,
So do we need two? Do we need, so homeless shelters over here, Crossings 2 is over here, and they're not the same thing.
That is correct.
So are you saying, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Councilman, one of each? Or what are you saying?
it sounds like we need one of each, but I feel like we definitely need, you know, if we're talking about within the next 5 years, we need to do something on that topic. We can't continue to have weekly meetings where we talk a lot about the situation because it's really important. And, you know, I know we're talking about, I guess, the CIP for, is this supposed to be, this column under CIP contingency, is it basically for what we're planning to spend next year?
So,
Within-
I agree, it's a little bit confusing, and I underestimated this conversation.
Okay.
For tonight, I'll say that. Basically, this list was generated from your input that we received from all of you. If you are looking to amend the CIP, so for example, the bypass fire station, I put amend the CIP with bonds, that is really a question. If you're gonna do that, doesn't go in any column, but when you get the ordinance on the 11th, the CIP will now include that.
Okay,
Same thing with the city hall lobby.
okay.
The homeless shelter, crossings to, Zero East High, the library, if those are things that you do not want to put in year 1 through 5 and designate some funding source for them, then I can just put them in the 6 to 10 year plan category, and we can work on that, be it through the strategic planning process or over the summer to tee that up for the CIP conversation next year.
Well, I guess, and help me out here, we need to be doing something for the homeless shelter within the next 5 years. So I'm not sure how that plays into what you just described, but we can't wait till year 6.
And so what I would say with that is, we don't need to make, if there's not a specific plan at this point, I think we just sort of hold that, and then that's one of the things we can come back during the year and amend the CIP.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Okay.
and
So can we do that?
And we can put that, you can, Ms. Hamel, that spreadsheet we're talking about where you're modeling all our wish list, you know, if we could see that model and then decide, okay, what do we want our next sort of instantiation, so to speak, of the CIP 5-year to look like?
And council members, I also would like to share, and just as a a reminder, your homelessness services providers, along with your Department of Human Services, are gonna come before you for a 4 PM session in May. So you can sort of learn the state of our unhoused and housing insecure populations. And that may give you all a little bit more of an idea of maybe where you feel like you may need to act and when you're able to hear from them during that 4 PM session. And they, other than 15 minutes for ADA, they have the whole session for you all.
And that's before your strategic planning session, so you'll have a follow-up moment
Okay.
also in May.
Okay. So that's where you would do the homeless shelter and the,
Well, you'd have the
Process.
ability to have that conversation.
but that's when those two conversations could occur. And then go into the strategic planning process later that month or that week, if I have the days right in my brain.
That is correct, but you would be able to go into that with information
Right,
from your
that we don't have
experts.
now. Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And we already have existing and maintained investment in Red Carpet Inn, which is providing the same type of permanent supportive housing as like a Crossings 2 would, once that project is completed. So I'm not saying that, trying to say, they estimated that would be enough, but given the homeless population roughly doubled in the course of a year, I don't know if that's currently the case, but.
Well, that's
And
good
really an
information.
important thing that needs to happen on that whole topic is someone needs to, or some group needs to, take leadership or whatever to sort of plant a flag on what this community wants to do, to come up with a plan that informs. I'm not saying that you all need to develop a homeless shelter for us, but, and I'm not, and I don't know the right way or who, needs to take the leadership in that within the community, but I do think there will be an ask at some point, I hope, to do something better than what we have, so,
That would be your conversation point.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Understood.
All right.
So, oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna,
Do it.
So before we go farther, let's roll back. We gotta roll back to the auditorium. Gotta note that we can't delay the auditorium without risk of it escalating in price.
Okay.
So that's a real concern. So you would need to be able to resolve how we will fund the auditorium so that it can be included in the contract that is pending.
And again, I think it's, in my mind, very straightforward. We're committed to doing it. You go ahead and write the contract, you do all of that stuff. But whatever's involved in funding both, the scope and the debt to do that comes out of the surplus line.
So what we could do now is amend the CIP, this is my recommendation, amend the CIP, put this auditorium in, show it as a bondable project, and then once we know more about the grant or whatever, we can always,
Make the
There you go.
necessary
Make the change.
adjustments.
And that would allow the contract to go forward because
That's
you
fine.
have.
I
That's
understand
fine, we can
that.
do that. And is that what you would also do as it relates to the bypass fire station in the city hall lobby, or no?
That would be the amendment, yeah.
that would be my, unless you wanna pay cash for either one of those for some reason.
Is there a reason to pay cash for
No, they
them?
sound like normal CIP types.
Yeah,
Okay, so do that for those two.
okay.
But those
Thank
two
you.
specifically are coming out of contingency is what you're saying.
No, it'll
No.
go in as
It'll go
bondable.
in.
It's
It's
bondable
bond-
It
matter.
won't come on either of these 3 columns.
Okay. got
It'll
it.
just show up as bondable and
Right.
then,
Got it.
Sorry.
So McIntyre Public Library has been out there for a long, long time. I get really nice books, free books from them once a year.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do we have any sense of where those projects are? They seem like they've been in the 5 to 10 year plan for 5 to 10 years.
So they have been in plans for several years, and I would also venture to say any number that we have is probably pretty stale from the time that they had the scoping and projected budget done. It is something that the director of the library, David Plunkett, is still, of course, very interested in. However, it's important that I share with every physical library branch that is within the city limits, we co-own it with the county.
Right.
And so any discussion on moving forward with maybe doing scoping and planning again, or moving forward with the project would really entail a joint effort from both localities. And I will share with you that there is not funding in the county's budget this fiscal year for the library, for example. So it's not as if they are funding it and we are not at this point.
It's not in their 5-year plan either, I don't think.
So, okay, so as I'm looking at the chart here, what do we still have?
East High, is that 6 to 10 year, or is that something you wanna address
Well,
now?
who knows? At this point, we don't have anything that we can ask about, so let's just leave it off.
Okay. Library, we putting in the 6 to 10 year plan?
Okay?
And I assume with Stribling LED, we just have to confirm those will be in.
I have them in now,
Yeah.
unless you wanna take them off the
Okay.
chart.
Let's leave them in.
So again, with, again, with the library, that's one that I would love to see some, I know you all are very busy, and if it's something that city council needs to get involved in to help push this along, but,
I've raised this issue with the county executive,
okay,
and we have to circle back and have a conversation
okay,
to see if we can get to a point of mutual
okay.
interest and
Okay.
agreement and commitment.
And you'll let us know when that happens.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Good job.
Okay.
What
So,
about the Silk Purse affordable housing? Did we talk about that?
That's
well,
next up.
there's not an ask yet.
Okay.
So, just one of those things that we think might be coming, so.
Is that a 6 to 10, since we think it might be coming?
Well, if you put it in 6 to 10 on the theory that it might be coming, recognizing that we're now using 6 to 10 years out as, we have no idea, but maybe. Yes, but if it's actually gonna happen, it's probably gonna happen in 2 to 3 years is my guess.
Oh, so then it shouldn't go to 6 to 10.
Well,
Except that we don't have an ask yet, so, I mean,
Right.
I would rather just leave it off entirely.
That's what I'm saying, yeah, because we don't, we'll leave it.
right, but what Ms. Hamill has promised us is she's gonna be working on a spreadsheet that puts in all of these sort of
Correct.
nebulous things. It won't be on the CIP proper, but will let us make some decisions.
Right.
Correct.
And I think it would not be unreasonable to have like a $5 to $6 million just placeholder for that item if we're trying to project out what it would be. Something in that world, I think, is realistic.
I'm not, I don't know, I go back and forth as to the wisdom of putting in placeholders for things we don't have proposals for.
Okay, are we good on anything else on the CIP?
I think so. I think we're
So
good.
what happens then if we get, and the same thing with Dogwood, you know, that we're about to hopefully fund, that just goes in, we just add that to our bonding capacity now, and you update it in terms of your financial systems, but it doesn't really go into the CIP because we're just taking care of it, is that right?
It'll amend the 23 CIP.
I see.
Keep in mind, the current debt projection that we have, has about $27 million over and above, what's in the CIP. That was just projected out based on roughly $15 million a year. So some of that is already baked in, but again, as you think about, you know, the 6 to 10 year plan, when these 5 million plus projects come up, piece at a time, that's when we need to go back and figure out, does it fit or not?
Right, and that's what you'll help us do with your.
Yes.
Okay. Shall we turn to the amendments?
Please.
Any issues with the first 4 items?
I think it's the consensus that we do the Jefferson School, but I just confess I'm still at a loss of, I thought we talked about this back in the fall, and there was gonna be a plan in place, but maybe I've just lost the thread.
The plan was that you all made the bridge agreement to offer the grant to give yourselves time for strategic planning. That hasn't happened.
Okay.
So that's the basis for this ask, is to take it, basically provide another runway while you all get through strategic planning, assuming that you'll be able to reconcile all of this, because you have a lot on your plate now for strategic planning, but once you can resolve
Yeah, I
that,
can't wait to see that agenda for.
then we'll be able to.
It's going to be fun.
It's more than 2 hours, so hopefully we'll get through it all. But this is just to get them through that, for their security, and knowing that they have that
So
expenditure
this is
covered.
the second bridge, basically.
Exactly, while you have the ability to then make that consideration.
We're good.
So, we had also talked about it in terms of reducing, taking at least some of that money out of the council strategic initiatives to help pay for that. What is the status of that account, that fund?
So it was, a little less than $70,000 left, I think. After the first bridge for the Heritage Center, with the year-end appropriation, we added $375 to that. And then, we built in $150,000 in this '24 budget. And so if you want to take out the 150, since you have the 375 to help offset this additional bridge to the Heritage Center, you can, or obviously you can leave it in, it's up to you.
So with the 375 being added, is that fund now to be 450?
Give or take.
I mean, while I understand that there is a value to having a strategic initiative fund, I would be a whole lot more comfortable with it if I had some idea that we had an agreement on what the criteria for its use would be. And there's never really been any
Something very
criteria.
strategic.
That's right. But an initiative
Yeah.
There you go.
from council.
Also can be discussed during strategic planning.
Well, if we don't feel like we're gonna need that full amount, and we wanna go ahead and allocate some to the Jefferson School, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think that's,
So as those two
Okay.
first two line items appear, that's fine with you all?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I need to, in full disclosure, note that I am on the Heritage Center Board, but it is a volunteer board. It's not a paying.
not
board.
paid. Yeah.
No, it's not.
Okay. And then, the $1,724 additional supplement for the public defender,
Sure.
we're good with that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Then, $12,000 additional voter notices, school renaming. I gather that some of the school renaming isn't gonna be happening, at least not right away.
That is correct. And so I don't think this mailing will be needed. I will say, though, I will make a pitch for the voter registration. The comp board did increase their reimbursement to the city. And I increased our revenue for that and failed to increase on the expenditure side for the same amount. So if it's not, it is not needed for these notices, but if it is council's desire, it does help sort of, it would help buy down next year is a presidential election, and there will be additional costs for that election. And we have traditionally, we've increased that budget every 4 years. This would help to take care of some of that, but it is not needed for the notices.
Well, and if the renaming notices don't have to go out in 2023, they probably will have to go out before the primary in 2024, so
Perhaps.
it's still in the fiscal year.
Perhaps.
And as
So-
many
so you're
voter
gonna-
notices.
You're gonna make that flip.
So just keep that.
Yeah.
She's gonna make the flip.
Then we get to, this is where I'm wondering whether we want to be discussing specific projects that folks want us to fund out of basically changing the recommendations from the VCF committee. Now, one of the things that I had suggested as a way of not having to revisit the VCF committee allocations is that we just declare that in addition to the VCF allocations, there's a certain amount of money that we as council reserve to ourselves the ability to supplement and to correct any situations that we think were perhaps not reflective of our current priorities. And
And that had been the plan last year, but, you know, didn't work out. But-
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how it all shook out. But, and I will get back to the point that, I've said it before, I'm not gonna beat the dead horse, that when we trust the VCF committee to make certain allocations, and they are reviewing all this information and we are not, that I think we should be very reluctant to, first of all, decide that we're gonna make different priority allocations, because if we're taking VCF allocations and recommendations, and we choose to increase something, necessarily somebody would have to lose. Something would have
Yeah.
to decrease. And I think it keeps us from having to make the decision about who has to be decreased if we just say, we're gonna have $200,000 or something like that, that we, as council, would recognize that we can add to various nonprofits who have gone through the VCF process. So we already know they've got their 990s in order. We already, you know, that those pieces of it, that they're qualified to receive the money.
Yeah.
Well, and is that,
Yeah, they've been vetted to some extent, and we may just disagree. I'll give you an example. The one that comes immediately to my mind is the FAR Youth Group, where 6 months ago, when this process was getting started, we didn't have quite the emphasis that we think we've got right now on youth programs. That the need for those youth programs has become, has been perceived to have become more acute as we see it now in April than perhaps as we were seeing it back in October. And so that would be an instance where doing no violence whatsoever to the VCF's efforts, we can say we want to add something, we want to do something more in that area. There may be other categories, other recipients like that.
well, functionally, won't we be doing that with the money coming from FY '24 amendments, contingency, or surplus? So,
Yeah.
But my point is simply, rather than see it as, we've already got the VCF pot, we want to rejigger the allocations within that pot, we would simply say, we're gonna put our own spin on it to the tune of a couple $100,000, or whatever the number.
Whatever the number, yeah.
What you're doing is enhancing versus taking.
Right.
If you have 20 people in the group and 18 of them got funded, but now we see 20 people in the group and we think we should give those other 2 over the 18 something, we're using our professional discretion to say VC Virginia
Vibrant
Vibrant
Community.
Community Fund, you did a great job. We have some discretionary monies and we would like to assist those other people.
That's my suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That ends up giving me less heartburn about the
No, I
VCF,
think it's-
disruption of
I think
VCF
it's-
process.
It's a
Yeah.
good point to make.
Yeah.
We were having a conversation earlier today with Ms. Marshall about the process of grant writers and all the effort they go to, and then all the effort the people that are grading these things go to, and we want to honor that work, while at the same time giving ourselves some discretion
Yeah.
where we think it's needed, so.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's always worth just, again, thanking all the people in the VCF process who did all the work of ranking these things.
It's a lot of work.
And
Yeah.
how much we appreciate it.
Yeah, and it is a lot of work, and we appreciate them. I mean, I did this for 20-plus years, and the earliest last year, I mean, before I got on council, I was still doing it. So it is a lot of process, but I knew always, when I first started doing this, when I kind of first got in the community, that it was a political aspect to it as well, that the decision makers have the final say, and but I like the idea of, we'll leave their recommendations alone, we'll make some supplemental additions to it. So I would say, let's just kind of get right to it.
Okay. Do we want to just go down the list in the order in which they are presented?
Yeah.
The FAR Child and the FAR Youth Program. We never got any information because the information we got this year did not include any information on projects that were not funded. So I have seen in the last couple days suggestions that they had asked for $40,000. I had also seen over the last few weeks requests that we fund them to the tune of $25,000.
Yeah, I think that they said that they could make the project work for 25. I see Ms. Green here is, yeah, and so,
That's great.
yeah.
The Vibrant Community Fund report does include unfunded requests and a blurb about what their request was for,
Yep.
how much their request was, and our recommendation, so that all of the applicants in the Vibrant Community Fund are included in the report.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I thought,
Just to provide some clarity.
sure.
I'm Taylor Frum, I'm the interim director of FAR, and the difference between the 25 and the 40 is a half-time position versus a full-time position to support the work that we're doing in the youth program.
Okay.
That's all I have to
Well, I guess I'll just jump in. I mean, to me, I think it's worth supporting the full-time position. We've talked a lot about youth programs being critical, particularly at this moment, and I just see this as being an ideal case of the exact kind of youth program and work that, we want to invest in. So that's my perspective.
How do other folks feel?
I support 100% for it.
I'm good with that too.
Okay,
So for the next one that's coming up, Child Health Partnership, conflict, my wife is on their board, non-paid as well. I've been through this before and it's not a conflict, but I just want to know.
sure. And so, the little card that we got this evening, it says that it was funded this fiscal year to the tune of $280,500. VCF proposed funding is $154,100, representing a cut of roughly $136,000 from last year. 126,000, I guess that is. And so they have suggested a couple of different ways to think about it all. I guess my question is, they're showing up as Group 2B, which suggests, number one, a sense that the application wasn't as strong, but a sense, number two, that perhaps the importance of the mission wasn't perceived as highly as it had been a year ago. What do we know about that? About why they came out at 2B instead of what I'm sure was a much higher rating last year? Do we know?
It's just the nature of the process, when you evaluate based on the metrics and what they submit every year. That's what the review team average score on the quality of the application and getting their application. And they all average their importance level as well, and that's how that was received by the staff and the committee who reviewed it.
And so if we are, and I have my little thing here, aren't you excited? But if we are taking all of those things into consideration and understanding what Child Health Partnership does and the importance of health and wellness, and particularly mental health and wellness, and we're looking at our little card that has been submitted to us this evening, I would propose that we look at last year's level of 126,400.
How do other folks feel about that?
An addition of 126.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, the one point that I would like to make is that we have tried to emphasize, particularly this year, but not only this year, the importance of providing measurable answers, of ways of evaluating the success of a program. And when the VCF committee decides, for whatever reason, that this application didn't do a very good job with all of this, part of our, I guess I'm governed by two thoughts here. The first is that, respecting the VCF's assessment of things, it would seem as though, for whatever reason, what they submitted was not as good a product as it could be, or as it should be. And the second piece of it is, the second piece of my thinking on it is, there's a sort of a situation I don't really want us to get into of anybody who feels like the VCF committee shortchanged them comes and appeals to council and gets a bunch of people to write letters to us, and we're supposed to immediately overturn what was done before. And what I've struggled with is trying to figure out how to give weight to the judgment of our VCF committee, and also to give weight to the perceived need, or to the need to provide more measurable outcomes. And if the answer that, if we're not getting the kind of data about measurable outcomes, how long are we going to continue to say, oh, don't worry about it, we'll make it up for you, we'll cover you?
Well, I appreciate that, Lloyd, and it makes perfect sense what you're saying. But if you're looking at the metrics, level 1 is an 88 to 100. Level 2 is an 87 to a 78. So they could have been 87 versus 88. If you look at the levels of A, B, C, and D, B is important, and it talks about the importance of the organizations to the community and the well-being of the community. So they may have missed by a point.
Mm-hmm.
So that point
So,
is the difference between the 1A and the 2B.
No, it's not. It's a difference perhaps between a 1 or a 1A and a 1B.
so, Lord, I mean, we're getting into kind of theoretical stuff. You know how politics work here. We won't be able to answer that because we could say something now, and future councils could still factor in their own kind of consideration and not just blindly go with the selection committee. So, you know, I don't want to have this debate after every nonprofit we, consider.
And I'll say,
So how do we avoid having that debate if we get questions from the public saying, give them more money?
Can I interject one point too, as you all discuss this? I just want to make one point that even the highest, correct me if I'm wrong, Misty, the highest scoring applications only received 90% of their ask.
Correct. That's in the report.
Okay.
It's right here.
And they got 46% of their ask. I mean, if I'm the only one who cares about what I will term the sort of the moral hazard of rewarding people who have not done the job that our raters want them to have done, then I'll shut up and we'll move on. I do think it's an issue that we ignore at our peril. I just don't think it's wise.
How does everyone else feel?
I'll say I concur with the perspective that Councilor Puryear and the Vice Mayor provided in terms of kind of philosophically how to approach how we assess these nonprofits. I think it's inherently a messy thing with uncertainty. And for this request, I'm open to increase funding. I don't know if the amount should be like 90% of the request. I believe if it's funding at last year's level, that would be funding 100% of this year's request, or I'm losing track. But whatever that number looks like, I'm interested in getting closer to it. You suggested funding at last year's level, correct?
So, Mr. Mayor, if I'm sympathetic to your arguments, I think that they certainly have some merit.
They have a lot of merit.
But I guess my question is, we sort of already have decided that this is separate from the VCF. It's sort of a bolt-on and an addendum to that process in which we're saying that we have a level of discretion. And if your concern is that, basically all it takes is for a lobbying campaign to get us to change our mind, I mean, I don't really see that. I feel like the folks here on this board know enough about these organizations to say that they merit. And it's, if you want to call it fiat, I guess it is a fiat, but I think we are at a point where people can say, I feel like this is a good request on its own merits without any aspersions to the VCF process.
Recognizing, of course, that we are making our decision with nowhere near as much information as the VCF raters had. We have no information, really.
So
They
I-
had a full application, they had extensive documentation, and we have none of that.
But you have an executive summary, if I can call it that, of all of the applications that were received. So if you are saying that we have professional judgment, we have professional discretion, because there's some money that we have that we can put towards these efforts to help them be at 80 to 85 to 90% on one hand, but then on the other hand, you're saying, I didn't read their proposal, so I don't know if it's worth us putting any money in based on our professional judgment. So you can't have it both ways. Either we're going to do something based on our professional judgment, or we're not. And
You're saying that report contains enough information for you to make a decision?
without reading everyone's proposal?
You're saying,
Yes.
yeah, the executive summary.
Yes, yes, because I'm a person that has written grants for my entire life. I'm a person that has reviewed grants for most of my entire life, and feel that the Vibrant Community Fund members did what they were supposed to do, and they did a yeoman's job. I am saying that even with them doing that, we have an opportunity to go back and enhance some of the groups that didn't get 100% or 90% or 85% or whatever percentage they were funded at, in order that they continue to do the good work that they have done historically in the community.
So if we were to fund at last year's amount, that would take us to 280,500?
No, I don't think it would.
Yeah. Adding.
That would
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we add another $126,000 to the budget for this line item, this takes us to their funding for last year.
So we could give them another 100, how about that?
Well, I think making them whole to last year is not unreasonable they're asking to be considered a 1A fundamental, and we're saying, no, we don't think so. And we're not funding them at their full request either, so I think making them whole for their
Doing what they did
maintaining what
last
we did last year, I'm personally willing to support that. And I think we have 3 or 4 people.
So what's the consensus then? For
Yes.
126.4?
Okay with you, Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
126.4.
Mr. Payne, you okay with that?
Yes.
Now, AHIP, I think there's gonna be money coming out of the housing allocation.
We don't make that commitment because that's going through a review process as well. We will know the answers to that on Monday. We
Okay.
hope. The committee meets on Monday. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be done on Monday. It's been a very challenging time this year to get through the proposals because the requests have exceeded the amount of money available.
So how are we going to make a decision on Tuesday? Just say X number of dollars as allocated from these different agencies, and we'll
Well,
figure it out later? or
Your
what?
your CAF consideration is for this year's CAF. So that
Oh, that's
really has
right.
nothing to do
That's
with this
right.
if you look at it from that perspective.
Could,
Okay.
Okay.
this one's obviously tricky because the CAF isn't done yet, which would have a huge influence. Would it possibly make sense to wait for the CAF process to finish? And if AHIP was not awarded money, there would be an opportunity when the year-end surplus is allocated to have AHIP and home rehab as a priority, we invest that money in?
Could we do that?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we can do that.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
It's just a weird situation, I feel
Right.
like, with CAF being underway.
Right.
So what do we put on this chart?
Whatever amount you would like to consider granting them.
Just to AHIP?
Yes.
Or if you're gonna wait for CAF to finish, you don't have to do anything.
I think we should
Tonight.
do the latter.
Let me just make sure, I want to make sure that you're considering this the way you need to consider it.
Okay? We're
The
listening.
CAF really should not factor into this decision. Because what you're considering at this moment is the fact that they were unable to be funded in the HOPS request that was formerly VCF.
That's a good point.
And that, the reason for them not getting funded in HOPS is because HOPS was for operating support only, and they requested operational work, brick and mortar work. So they were deemed ineligible. So if you want to grant them something based on what they proposed, then you should consider their request to the HOPS program as what you want to give, irrespective of CAF.
And what was
That's a
that?
choice. I'm just offering that to you as clarification, as if you're considering them based on their request for FY '24, it does not have anything to do with the CAF.
So this one is a little more cut and dried to me in terms of the application itself. It sounds like the application just was
In the wrong place.
Yeah.
incorrect or,
Missed,
huh?
missed.
Miss? I think that this program, what they do, you know, I think it should be part of our affordable housing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, tool, where if we can do some relatively minor improvements to keep people in their homes, that's what I see this is doing, so,
Yeah. Most affordable house is one that's already built.
yeah.
And it is, and it has been, so there's been no change in that posture. This is just a matter of the proposal was submitted to a fund that it was not eligible to be considered.
So
Okay.
should, and I guess in the future, I don't know if this is Misty or Brenda's, you know,
Brenda.
kind of, Brenda, that they need to be informed next year.
They were.
Okay.
Everybody got the same
Okay.
packet, sorry.
Is what they are submitting through CAF the same application that went through HOPS, or is that just a completely?
There was one RFP for HOPS specifically that they responded to. We did a series of RFPs for each of the different funding amounts, also making sure that they understood what the purpose of those funds were for.
How much was their request here?
250,000?
The actual request was 162.
Oh,
Yeah, so the question is,
And those other agencies got how much of their request?
Oh, yeah, and the HOPS agencies received 90%.
So 90% of their 162 would be what?
146, basically.
Okay.
145.
yeah, I
8.
think, you know, in my mind, I don't really know where it should come from, but it needs to come from
Somewhere.
somewhere. I think we need to do this because they work on homes every day, you know, and I know it's a waiting list. You know, many years ago, I've been on site with them, and it's
Well, for what it's worth, and I don't want this to be misunderstood as saying, hey, there's still $2 million left, let's go spend $2 million. But even if we gave them the 90% of their ask, it's still gonna be $1.7 million that we're looking at this point.
I'm comfortable with that from either FY '24 amendments, or it would be a different timeline, but you're in surplus. I think whatever investment is made will result in a clear, deliverable, positive work.
Could you repeat that, Michael?
So let me make sure I understood you correctly, Lloyd. You're right. You said fund the request at 90%.
90% of the 162 is 145.8.
So 145.8 from that $2 million in FY '24 amendments.
And I'm counting up the other things that we're talking about
If you put in
spending.
that, we'd be at 1.8 if we put in the 145.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the next item is the one that's probably gonna be the largest item that we're talking about, pathways. But, you know, my point, 145.8, we are not getting close to having spent all of the money that is available to be spent.
Okay. This is wonderful. We need it.
Yeah.
Gonna make a supersonic man out of Mr. Rogers, eh?
Ashley can get it for you.
That's great. And that's okay. Sometimes you do nothing. Someone's calling
We
you.
needed that comic relief.
You sure did. Thank you so much.
I wanna know, who is it who calls you who
Yes.
gets supersonic man ringtone?
I don't know, it wasn't a call. It's one of those funny things that happen.
It happens. That's technology. I
Okay,
love
I'd
it.
say it's accurate, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, yeah, there you
You're the
go.
man.
so let's move on to talk about pathways.
Pathways.
So we've agreed to AHIP.
I'm sorry, are you leaving it in the amendment for
Oh.
24?
Oh, stop.
250,000 was the number. That was their ask. I just wanted to confirm that to be sure, so that was the right
So
number.
that would be 225, would be 90%.
Oh.
That was fast, man.
Sorry.
Hey, I could take 10% off.
Oh, good job.
Aren't you smart?
I think sounds like consensus on that.
You wanna do 225 then?
I'm good with that.
So the
Yes.
next one?
Now we, to pathways. And we have one recommendation for 250, another recommendation for 250, one recommendation for 500. I did not give a specific amount for my recommendation.
So,
Ms. Purrier, how are you feeling about,
I didn't give a dollar amount.
are you okay with the general notion of finding additional funds for pathways?
I am,
Okay.
but I
And-
do not have a funding request amount.
Right. I don't either, so you're
I'll-
in the same boat.
I'll jump in. My thought was for an increase of 500,000 to get to 1 million, and my thinking was that will still be less than last year's total of 1.5 million. But looking at the existing need we know existed last year and the usage last year, as well as changes that are underway in terms of SNAP and Medicaid benefits and the impact that will likely have on people, that I think that would still be not enough to meet every need, but I think is at least somewhat closer to being a last line of defense for avoiding evictions and other crises.
Yeah, I mean, I had in mind 250, but if we can pull off, you know,
If we can swing 500, I would be supportive of that. I was just reading today on the news about seniors being evicted from assisted living because their Medicaid ran out. So it's real. I'm on the Social Services Board as well, and also Ms. Marshall has brought up a number of times in our meetings how this fund source, I mean, basically we're carrying water that the state and the federal government should be carrying, honestly, but if we can help people, this is like direct assistance to our most vulnerable. And it seems like we have the money, so.
Well, before we conclude that we have the money, I'm just looking through the list here. I'm
Right.
curious, CRHA, what's that thought to be an amendment for? How much money are we talking about for there?
So, I mean, we can wait to get there, but I'm happy to get into it. But that's their request through the HOPS process, which is, let's just keep it for that, 137,000. And it was for operations and the resident services that they provide at their various sites. So it was staffing investment, again, for resident services.
And then is there a thought, about what the line for employee comp study implementation would be? I mean, how much are we thinking would be necessary there? Or we just have no earthly idea at this point?
We're taking as much as we can get from that's left over, really. 'Cause
Yeah.
we're in that range, we're not sure, we're still,
Uh-huh.
Human Resources is doing the work. When I will tell you that in previous discussions today, when I told Ms. Hamill, she showed me that, you know, there might be 900,000 left over. And my response was, we'll take that, if it's council's will,
Mhm.
because I think we're gonna need at least that.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Well, so what happens if we plug 500 into Pathways, 10,000 into Unicode, 125 into 100 in CRJ? Where does that,
You said 100 for CH?
just walking around dollars, yeah.
Then we've got 2 entries for Ready Kids, 1 entry for Peace in the Streets, and
Yeah.
then the employee comp study.
Yeah, I don't think the Ready Kids it's a whole lot.
Well, I don't remember seeing any
I don't
complaints
either.
from people about,
I didn't
you
know.
know, about Ready Kids funding.
Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I got
Okay, did you get any, Michael?
I remember getting a couple emails.
You do or you don't?
I do.
Okay, what did they say? Cause I don't remember getting them.
Just the general, like,
Okay,
being in support of increased funding levels. I can't
Okay.
remember if they referenced that specific program they
Okay.
would be able to do.
Did they
Okay.
get funding in any other way with ECI?
yeah, they're here.
I mean, I think that they didn't, it was, I think like 15, 20 for one and 10 or something for another, so it's not,
Well, you had asked for an additional 26 for the counseling program, additional 19 for the Healthy Families program.
I couldn't remember exactly.
Yes, I couldn't remember that either.
I mean, do we have any information about why they, I assume that they came in with a lower rating than they were expecting.
And I guess my, one of the reasons I supported funding them is that they, you know, with counseling, there's such a need for that now with everything that's been going on. I think that's why we definitely need to continue to support. And the Healthy Families Program, I know that they work closely with Child Health Partnership, with families that the most vulnerable when they're young. So I just think that, you know, if we build healthy families from the beginning, we won't have to maybe invest in some of these other things later. So that's why I supported it.
So you had suggested specifically 26 for counseling and 19 for healthy families. Were those numbers based on what they had been cut from prior years, or how did those numbers
Well,
come
what
up?
they requested, as I recall, that I thought for sure that recommended the funding, the counseling for what we wanted, for what they asked for, because of the need was so great. And
Here's the
so-
counseling one. And,
Counseling program, they requested $75,901.
And they got
They
30.
were recommended as a 2B, which made them
45%.
34,917,914.
70% category.
So it's 34,914. I'm looking at the information you sent. Okay, and then, hold on. This is Healthy Families over
So
here.
they were 2B, so they got 46% of
Mhm.
their asks.
I'm just curious how number 26 and 19 got developed.
You wanna see the sheet here?
No, it's, yeah,
Those are his requests.
yeah,
right?
yeah.
No. I was asking if you wanted to see this while he told you about his
Okay.
request.
Sure.
Okay, so it's the bottom
Yeah.
one and the top.
Well, I wanted to just, you know, round out the numbers as, you know, to make it as tight as we could. It's not any magic to it, other than the counseling, I wanted to fund that whole.
And the counseling, you're saying specifically will help with some of the issues with youth right now?
Well, the youth
Mental health.
that they work with, the families, they, you know, the counseling, it definitely will help them. And, they have counselors, and if they would go out in the public, you know, to get it, it would be really hard because they're
Backed up.
backed up and it's just not.
There's just not enough.
Yeah.
It looks, Juan, like maybe the numbers you've got would be, what would be necessary to bring them up from 2B to like 1B, or 2B
Okay.
to 1A, or
Mhm.
to 2A or
Yeah,
something?
it looks like
Just
that.
to bring it up one level.
Mhm,
Yeah.
that's what it looks like to me.
Well, I mean, I'm, as a former board member of Ready Kids, I'm very supportive of the organization. My general feeling about changing VCF allocations, I'm not gonna rehash.
So we're doing 2020 or 2019?
Well, you got a suggestion from Juan for 26 for one and 19 for the other. I don't know if that's, is that your current thought?
Yes.
I said, let's do it.
And I was a former board member there about 20 years ago too, but that was a long time ago.
Do I have these programs right? 26 for counseling and 19 for the
Yeah, I
healthy
think so.
families?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
I think you're right.
That's certainly what his request was. It also matches the math that I was doing earlier.
Okay.
Can I ask one quick question? So the Buck Squad was funded through DCF, right?
Right.
160?
161, I think.
161.
And that's still there and still in the plan? Okay.
So now we're
Peace
with
in the
Peace
Streets.
in the Streets.
What's the story there?
Well, I don't have a specific dollar amount I had in mind, but my reasoning was, obviously, you know, we're having a lot of conversation about gun violence, and at Forum seeing it as an all-hands-on-deck situation. And this is an organization that provides mentorship, which is a model that's been successfully nationally, and just that there was value there as one of the organizations on the front lines. That was my reasoning. I don't have a specific dollar amount in mind, and being completely honest, I don't know what different dollar amounts mean in terms of the programming that is or isn't available. But that's where I was coming from with it.
Yeah.
Is it applied through VCF? Yes.
What did it?
I'm looking, hold on.
And I believe their
Page
application.
23.
Under Peace in the Streets, so the organization that
It's
has
a
affiliation
Uhuru.
with Peace in the Streets is Uhuru. I believe, I'm not clear on what the conversations have been on around Peace in the Streets, but Uhuru has some association with that and
Yeah.
that's where their applications.
Okay. here
Peace
it
and Street is one of their
It's one of
programs.
their programs. And they,
Their request was 100,000.
yeah.
For their Healthy, Wealthy, and
But that
Wise
was
Youth
for their healthy,
Prevention
wealthy,
Program.
and wise. I don't see, unless they're using it as a broad, you know what I mean? Hmm.
So, Councilman Payne, do you have a recommendation? Sounds like they requested 100.
I mean, it's tough for me to say because I feel like I'm just kind of like, the numbers I would pull would be arbitrary in terms of not knowing how it connects to their programming. But I mean, anywhere from 75, 100, 50,000. I'm not sure what all those differences mean practically, to be honest. But
Do we know why their application was not well received? Anybody?
For the same, you know, we use the same 17 metrics, and
Mhm.
that's where their score landed with the rubric that all the reviewers use. So I can say that Hunter Smith has already started to offer technical assistance for organizations who are wondering why and how I can improve my application for next year.
Right.
He did that before the process,
Yeah.
and he did it during the process,
Yeah.
and he's gonna do it after the process. In fact, I think he already has an appointment set with several organizations that did not get fully funded.
It's kind of arbitrary, but just to throw out a number, 75. Again, where I'm coming from is just it's one of the organizations on the front lines dealing with mentorship and gun violence, and just seeing value there. But I'm certainly open to more discussion, and that number, I'll admit, is kind of arbitrary.
And to be clear, are you funding the application as presented, or just Peace in the Streets generically?
The application as presented.
I guess the only concern I have about that organization, based off some of the conversations that we had, maybe Ms. Graves could help me remember with Uhuru. I mean, there was a lot of outreach that happened, right, prior to, and it seemed like they really had the opportunity to get the help they needed to really do a solid application, and for whatever reason that didn't happen. So my only concern is I'm just not sure the capacity is there to like take advantage of this funding is all I'm concerned about. I mean, the other things that have come before us, I feel like have enough confidence in Ready Kids or AHIP or whatever, but I don't know anything about Uhuru, and I'm a little concerned based off the discussion that we had with Hunter, that they've got that capacity to actually.
Well, so I wonder, supposing we were to say, well, let's set aside, pick a number, $200,000, for violence prevention efforts, or something like that as a generic category, subject to staff figuring out what some appropriate places to put that might be, and then coming back with recommendations and after some study, rather than, I feel really kind of uneasy about saying, well, we don't really know what they would use the money for, but let's go ahead and pick a number.
Well, and the other thing too is just, again, some of the feedback that I heard about that particular organization is that they were given the opportunity to really participate, and for whatever reason weren't able to. So that gives me more pause than with the other things that have come up. But what you've proposed, I think, is a good compromise, and if, maybe some work can happen with them where they're able to present something credible, then they could receive some assistance.
And what I'm thinking of would not just be them, but other operations that might come up during the course of the next 6 months or so, who would say, hey, we got a program here.
Yeah, and again, I do understand, and definitely respect that. It's just, if it is an all-hands-on-deck emergency situation, is some more flexibility warranted for organizations on the front line. That said, what you've outlined in terms of having like $100,000 for general programs dealing with that area, that not just they, but other organizations, have a chance to get money from and go through, I can kind of support that.
Okay.
Was it 100 or 200?
I think he said 200.
It's a 100, 200. My point was that I don't want it to be, if it's going to be all hands on deck, I don't want it to be, but only the first person through the door.
Well, they requested 100,
Right.
although it gave the title that Ms. Hammond wrote on the board, but alluded to what Mr. Payne was talking about in their brief synopsis.
Well, I think what Lloyd is just suggesting is let's just have a little catch-all violence prevention programs, put 200 in it, and we can suss out. Maybe Uhuru gets some of that, maybe they don't.
And maybe it doesn't get, maybe we don't spend any of it, who knows, but.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we.
I think I can, so you're gonna take, okay, so, I see I got it, okay, I'm with you.
And this may give us some flexibility,
Right.
if things come up this summer, that
Okay.
we may not know about,
I can support that.
Okay. And so that would leave us potentially with $896,974 for implementation of the employee comp study.
Did you have anything further on the drug court or therapeutic docket?
Oh, I did not calculate what that amount would be.
Spoke too soon.
Misty, do you by chance have that?
I think I've got that someplace, let's see.
They were funded at 90% because they're in the fundamental category.
Right.
So you're wanting to know what's the difference between what they asked for and what would give them their full ask, or you're just asking
Yes.
what their full ask is?
Well, what the full ask is, and we do the math, but actually, the letter that I've got from Mr. Carew doesn't specify what I thought it did. So what are we giving them? We can do the math from there.
I can tell you 1 second.
I'm just determined to keep you tonight.
Don't be mean, be nice.
I don't think I have it broken down, but I just have the total. I don't have it broken down by program. I should have gotten that.
Yeah, I thought I knew it, but I don't.
Um, yeah, I mean, the county does fund it, and I asked them, but I didn't hear back from what they funded those
So drug
programs.
court was 71,769. This is on page 27 if you're looking at this. Tender
I just found it.
submitted 5 applications. They're all given 1A ratings. So which one? It was just drug court?
Well, I was thinking drug court and therapeutic docket in particular, but they have also been doing I mean, they're basically an arm of the court.
So
For-
you're just gonna add 10% to the,
Actually be adding about 11% to what's allocated.
to the total amount then?
Well, okay,
Or just the therapeutic docket and the drug court?
well, let's take those two numbers first. One of them is 71,769. What's the therapeutic docket?
103,500.
Okay, so that's 175,269. Add 11% to that, that's about another 17. You got something there?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So it'd basically be adding about $20,000 between those two.
19,279.
Okay. 19,279 works for me.
Between the two programs.
Probation, pretrial, reentry. Okay.
And
So if we could add that for,
For all of them, Kristen, or you just did those two? Okay.
those are the two that I had specifically been asking
All right.
about.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
And we
So-
can have the rest.
And the rest we'll
So,
leave
but how
for.
much did you say, 9 what?
He
Initially?
hit $900,000, how much he thought he was gonna be left with for
Yeah,
the employee
but-
comp study.
But that's a good start.
That's right.
Well, would you, never mind.
What's the question?
No, that's okay.
We're talking about the leftover for
Yep.
employee comp study
Yeah, I know,
implementation.
but I was just thinking, if you were thinking it was 9, how would, never mind, it's okay.
It
Point
was
is,
just
he made
quick
a pretty
math
good
based
guess.
on what you all had sent. We had
Right.
just filled in the numbers.
Yeah.
I
But
get
we
it.
didn't have the 200,000 in for the violence prevention
Right, and that's why I
program.
was saying, would that make sense to adjust because of,
Oh, I see.
do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think 877 sounds like a good number for Mr. Rogers, doesn't it?
Are you good with that, or did you want 9? Speak
We're
now.
good, we're good with that. We're good with that.
Speak
I
now.
hope you're good with it.
Well, and there's still contingency year in surplus, which
Right.
get eaten up quicker than a lot of people think, but
Yeah.
All right.
So that's a good question.
So I think we've made it through our
Wait a
spreadsheet.
minute, say that again?
So the revenue, the budget surplus piece, at this
Just
point,
leave it alone.
we're just gonna say,
It's
we're not
just
gonna make
gonna-
any
no.
predictions. on
You'll
it.
have opportunities
That's right.
to do that.
It's just gonna be there and look cute.
Last year is the only time in memory that we actually spent any of that at this time. We don't have to do it.
Really.
And we shouldn't do it.
Well, again, I would like to earmark the auditorium somehow coming from that. I'm not sure how y'all will do that, but
I have great faith that you can figure out a good way to do it.
I'm sure in our 6 to 10 year plan, we're gonna wanna earmark a lot of that for debt service.
Yep,
I feel confident that that's what we are going to do.
Yep.
all right.
Okay?
Any questions you need us to answer between now and Tuesday?
No, I'm good.
Everybody clear?
Yes, sir. Looks like we have someone online who might wanna speak.
That's it. Okay, I never got a script for tonight. Are we doing this public comment?
Yes,
Okay.
this is the last one.
All right. So if we're going to be doing public comment, then everybody who would like to comment, you have 3 minutes. You can join by raising your hand if you're on Zoom, or *9 if you're on a phone. And do we have somebody online?
We do.
Who's that?
Greg Winston.
Mr. Winston, you have 3 minutes. You're on with us.
How you doing? My name is Greg Winston. I'm on the board of the Charlottesville Free Clinic. And our allocation this year was 23% less than what it was the prior year. And I would like to petition to have it either back at the 2023 level of $120,000 or grossed up to $130,000. Reason being is that we are facing the Medicaid unwinding that was unanticipated. And we anticipate that of the 10,000 residents of Charlottesville who are on Medicaid, state estimates are between 15 to 20% of those will lose coverage, which means that about 1,200 to 2,000 individuals will now be off the Medicaid rolls and will lose their health insurance coverage. Charlottesville Free Clinic is a clinic of last resort, and we do provide care to those, and we see those people falling into our area of having to care for. And therefore, we see increased need for the upcoming year, and would request your consideration of getting us back to our 2023 funding level of $119,404, or at least grossing up to $130,000 for the 2024 period.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. What are they getting right now from us?
I don't know.
Do you have the?
I don't know what they're currently getting. They have 2 applications that were in here.
I can tell you in 1 second.
Yeah, that's why I had, yeah.
It's gonna be on the last page, because they're in the fundamental category, or not the last page, but the same page that.
It's right there. Lloyd, go back. Show him.
We have 2
Mm-hmm.
applications.
Yeah. So 83, so 92,430 is what they've got. Okay. And we're already funding them at the highest rate that we're funding anybody. Okay.
So is the 20+% reduction they referenced in relation to us receiving a different request amount this year than last year? I guess I'm just not sure what it's referencing.
He said because of the changes in Medicaid, there would be additional persons in the city that would be utilizing their services.
Right.
What's puzzling me is, though, that if he's 119,404 is what he said they were getting last year. This year, at 90%, they're getting 91,000, which would suggest they had applied for about 101 or 102, and not even applying for the same amount
Same
that they got last year.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Is there anyone else on the line?
Okay, who's the next person?
There is Elizabeth Stark.
All right, while we're figuring out this other thing, Ms. Stark, come on ahead, you got 3 minutes.
Hi, councilors. I just want to say I really appreciate you taking the time to consider more robust funding for pathways. And I just want to say thank you. So I know this has been a long process, and I know that, so many in our community are facing the various sides of poverty and, what things look like as people lose services right now. So I know this is a hard job, and, I would love to see the free clinic funded too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Somebody next online?
No more hands raised at the moment.
Okay. I'll give it another minute or two. I just got another one? Okay.
Yeah, Ange Khan.
Ms. Khan, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm calling in because I'm really concerned that you all are referring to funding that is designated for programs intended on serving the community as a reward. Funding is not a reward. Community organizations supporting Charlottesville's most intentionally under-resourced communities continue to battle it out every year for crumbs through the funding process. And organizations that have the privilege of having the most experienced grant writer or applicant wins. The reward in this process should be knowing that you all are supporting the youth, folks experiencing homelessness, and other vulnerable populations. Not that a written application is the best, or you didn't understand that process. You all are city council. You all should know what's going on in the community. You all should be well aware of the community initiatives that are taking place. You should know what is permanent supportive housing versus a shelter. You all should know these things. This is your job. Your job is to make these decisions around funding. If you want to see a thriving community, you'll have to up your game in this area. And I'm also speaking in my individual capacity. So please consider funding the FAR. You're talking about youth. There's this, the youth are running wild and such. Okay, there's programs that are on your radar right now that support the youth, and you're just discussing them as if it's like, okay, we're gonna not do, we're gonna only offer this amount of funding, but yet you'll fully fund a police budget, right? That doesn't make any sense. Our community needs service support. Our community needs funding for these supports. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khan.
Thank you, Ms. Khan.
I would note that we have decided to recommend fully funding the FAR youth program request. Is there anybody else online?
Currently, no hands raised.
So have we figured out the answer to what was coming up with the free clinic?
Free Clinic had 2 program applications for a total of 1027, and they were funded at 92,430. So
Yeah.
each of those programs were funded at 90%.
Yeah. And the request was for the phone request was for another $17,000 more than they had requested on paper, apparently. Okay. Does that prompt anybody to want to change what we've done so far?
No. Yeah, it's unfortunate that these things aren't adding up between what we received and what they said they asked for. It's a real need. It's a huge need. I don't think it's appropriate to fund something over the course of a phone call, but I think funding them at 100%, given what the free clinic does, and given what we're hearing about Medicaid, I think we should.
So
Yeah.
if you took it from the line item that was 200,000, it would give them 183, and you would just shift the 17 to the free clinic.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You talk about giving them 17 more than they asked for.
No,
If-
she's talking
no,
about
no,
taking
no,
it from
if-
the youth prevention.
I'm saying if you took 17 from that line item it would give these people that. It would give this
Right.
group that, if that's a decision that is made.
I would just say add 17 on, or whatever the number is it 17?
Well,
It's
if-
10,270 would get them to their 100%
I'll
of their
just add that
ask.
as another line item, and then you'll have $10,000 less to hire staff.
Yeah, that, yeah,
I can live with that.
yeah.
I will
I
simply
sup-
point out that we've now created an entirely different category for funding. That's what y'all want to do?
What is the category we've created?
100% for Charlottesville Free Clinic.
Well, didn't we do that for OAR therapeutic docket as well?
We do, did it for therapeutic docket and for the drug court, because we've got a memorandum of understanding and contractual obligations and other counties and other jurisdictions who are kicking in the full freight, and we're deciding not to.
Uh-huh. I see your point.
So, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand what the difference is if they got the highest rating, which is 90%, how, did they get less than they asked for?
Because apparently they got 90% of what the paper applications were for. Mr. Winston's figure was for about $17,000. He was saying that their request had been $17,000 more than what our paperwork shows.
Is that,
Is that accurate?
Chrissy, can you see the budget, online budget book? I only have the online, and I'm having like the worst time.
I have it. So
What did they ask? Does it say what they asked for this year?
I'm looking at this spreadsheet that we had, and their ask was 2 programs. One was 10,000 and one was 92,700. So a total of $102,700.
Means they asked for less than they did last year.
Right.
Oh, yeah, so I think that we leave,
So basically what he's saying is between the time he asked and the time the request was granted, the situation has changed, and he's asking to consider the situation change.
I just think we need,
Yeah,
we
I
need a little
think-
more on it than.
Yeah, I think that
I mean,
that's.
but I'm not saying to do something one way or the other, but what I'm saying is, from the time I gave you my piece of paper, something has changed, and now I'm notifying you that something has changed, and I'm asking you to consider the something that changed. Whether that is done or not is not for me to say.
I think that we went by their application and they got the highest funding, so.
The 90%.
Fundamental, so they're
Yeah.
considered
Oh, the
in
seven
the
fundamental, yeah.
fundamental category, which
Mhm.
means they're an essential service that the city has
Yeah.
chosen to provide.
Yeah.
The reason why that we chose to fund that category 1A at 90% is
Mhm.
because this year, we got twice as many applications.
Yeah.
I can give you the number.
Yep.
We have to be able to make it work on council's behalf, that we fund as many organizations that we believe that are quality and prepared to carry out your mission.
Yeah.
And when we had, last year, we funded 44 organizations, and this year, we funded 59 with the same amount of money.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to use 90%, because because of the requests, there's twice as much as what we had. So
Yeah.
it's like a Tetris game
Yeah.
of what percentage
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
offer to make the needs meet for the most, knowing going into it that we will never meet full
Correct.
ask, the full
Mhm.
need. That's just the game
Yep.
that it's not a
Yeah.
game, but that's
Yeah.
the challenge.
That's the
that
way
we
it
face.
rolls out.
So
That's the way the ball
So-
goes.
last year, we funded 1As at 85% for what it's worth.
Mhm.
This year, we were able to fund those 1As at 90, given how the scores shook out. So
What was the total VCF this year?
$2.1 million.
And that included the hops piece?
No.
Hops moved.
That, we moved that
And
out.
that was actually $200,000 more than last year, keeping in mind that we moved out 575 from VCF to hops and calf, right? Hops. because all of the housing, applications or programs went through that process.
Sure, but it's, in terms of the relevant programs, we're investing $200,000 more this year than last year.
Yes.
I
And
would
that's
share,
without the housing.
Right,
yes.
right, but
And I would share, though, the free clinic did have a fundamental change after they would have submitted, which is the rollback. That is not a lie, that is accurate. There are people who are going to be without insurance very shortly. That is not false, that is accurate. And some of those people may be able to reapply, some of them may not be able to reapply because of their situation. So that is, I did want to share, that is a real and legitimate thing that did come after their application process, because that rollback started to be processed at the end of, in March, I believe, in Virginia. We started a little earlier than some other states. So that what the caller did share is accurate, and that did come down after they would have had to submit their application.
So, yeah.
Cause anybody to want to reconsider?
Reconsidering what?
Give them any additional money.
As I said, I'm open to it. I understand where we're at, but.
Yeah, I'll be open to additional $10,000 for 'em, based on what's going on with Medicaid.
Could it do us more benefit to think this is a substantial change underway in terms of Medicaid changes that we think either from surplus funds or contingency that you kind of, we have some of that in a way we're thinking,
Excuse me.
because we're not basing this number off any clear idea of, like, does it provide any additional programming? Is it actually helping them meet this new need that we're gonna see in the community? I don't know if I'm making sense, but like.
I think the gentleman feels that the additional funds will help the new need. Now, I can't say
Right.
that, but I inferred
Yeah,
that
that's
from
clearly
what he
he's getting
said.
at, yeah.
That's what I inferred.
And Ms. Marshall has confirmed, given us,
That the need will be greater.
yeah. I'm fine with just doing it. I understand your point about it, breaks a rule or whatever, and I respect that. If there's a way we could put an asterisk by this one and say, because of a change in Medicaid, that's why we chose to do that at the last minute. I know all this feels arbitrary, but,
Okay,
can
so
only. Huh?
Wanda suggested an additional 10.
10.
Michael.
All right, I mean, my point is really more that I don't know how far that 10,000 realistically goes to changing what they're able to do.
Uh-huh.
If our concern is we really need to make a strategic investment with the Medicaid situation planning, we'd probably be better off to think about our surplus funding and kind of analyze what will actually make the biggest impact and how much is really needed. I'm fine with 10,000. I just don't see that being. Maybe I guess I have a hard time seeing how it transforms what can be delivered to the many people who will be in that situation. But there's no need to get fully into that, I guess, right now.
I think it's a good point for the strategic planning conversation.
There you go.
We only have 2 days. We've had it like 4 days
Well,
already.
but I think it gets to, why we're putting more money into pathways, for example. It's a similar sort of thing that's going on in our country right now. And having a conversation, like we were talking with Ms. Marshall earlier, about health investments. And, I realize we can't do everything, but I do think when we get to the point of we've spent a lot of time and money, we need to spend more time and money talking about affordable housing. But I do think we're getting to a place where we're going to have to be that last line of defense for lots of people. And so I would like, as we get into the strategic planning conversation, talk about those things robustly. But that's for a different night.
Well, so we had already said we wanted to give another $10,270 to the free clinic.
How did you come up with that number?
That's the difference between their ask and what they got.
Oh, okay.
And so the question is, do we want to give them anything additional to reflect the fact that there is about a $17,000 difference between their ask and the amount they received last year? And I had interpreted Vice Mayor Wade's $10,000 as an additional $10,000 in addition to the $10,270. Is that accurate?
Well, I guess, I didn't know the details, but it's over the two programs.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the programs was decidedly less than the other, but.
Yeah, 10,092, I think, was the other one, so.
I guess, should that are you asking that number be 20,270?
No.
Just 10,270?
Yes.
Okay, so what are other people thinking about that?
Across the two, or for the one that was funded at $90,000?
Well, they were both found. That one's right.
See, there were two different programs.
Right.
So are you talking about the larger one
It's across the two, I think.
or across the two? That's what I didn't understand. What are you saying?
The difference between their ask and what they got
Mhm.
is $10,270 for both programs.
Okay.
So if you give them the $10,270, they would be 100% funded for both programs.
Oh, okay.
And so the question that was then raised is, well, given that they're saying that the ground has shifted underneath them, even though they asked for 102,700 last fall, and they're now saying, well, if we could get 119,404, then that would put us back to where we were last year.
The simple answer from me is the more money we can give them, the better. And so if understand what you're saying is make them whole for last year, I support that.
That's what Mr. Winston is asking us to do.
I'm for that. I think Michael is correct that we don't really know what that's going to do, if anything. We need to look at it more holistically, but right here, right now, I think that's not an unreasonable request, given what's happening with Medicaid.
And I will certainly be supportive of that as well.
Yes, I mean, my philosophy is similarly in terms of the more money, the better, so I will take this
So you want
opportunity to say yes.
You want to give to the Charlottesville Free Clinic the difference, add the difference between what they're presently set to be getting and $119,404?
Correct.
So what did they get?
They're powwowing over there.
102,700.
26,974. 26?
No, it's 26. That's the percent change.
So by my calculations, that would add $16,704 to them, in addition to the $10,270.
Oh, okay, we need that. over there.
I have 26,974.
Yep.
Is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yep.
26,974.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Going once?
All that math.
Going twice?
Excellent work, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Good job, good job.
So we have nothing further to do. We are adjourned until 5:30 on Tuesday. So where are we meeting then? Here?
Here.
Okay.
Here. Okay.
Well, the planning commission will be meeting at 5:30
Oh, it's in council
here.
chambers.
Council chambers.
Yes, Sedgwick
Okay.
Place.
Good, thank you.
And then we have to leave there.